Kamala Harris has Democrats dreaming big in North Carolina. The nonpartisan Cook Political Report has shifted its electoral college rating for the state from lean Republican to toss-up. Cook's editor-in-chief, Amy Walter, explains that the race is tightening, quote, not because Harris is cutting into Trump's vote, but because Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents are coming home. NBC's Steve Kornacki is at the big board digging into those North Carolina numbers. What are you seeing, Steve?
Yeah, it's interesting, Chris. I mean, we think of it more as a red state. North Carolina did go for Donald Trump in 2020. Really the only time in sort of modern political history since 1980 it's gone Democratic was for Barack Obama by about this much in 2008. But North Carolina's been close. It's been a couple points. Take a look back at 2016. Donald Trump carried the state. It was by about 3.5 points. You could see Democrats erased more than half of that Trump margin from 2016 in 2020, brought it down to just about a 75,000 vote difference between Trump and Biden in 2020. So, we're talking about not huge changes needed here for Democrats to actually flip the state. And so what Democrats are looking at here is take it from their perspective first. There's sort of a tension in North Carolina between different parts of the state geographically, and we see this nationally, too. What Democrats, where they draw hope from, are cities and metropolitan areas, suburbs, big, densely populated suburbs with lots of college degrees. Those are the voters who've been going in their direction. Areas around, this is Wake County, the Research Triangle, Chapel Hill, Durham in this area, too. Metrolina, Charlotte, that area, even out in the mountains, Asheville. Those are sort of the areas demographically that are rich for Democrats and are trending in their direction. And I'll give you an example. Look at Wake County. This is where Raleigh is. Big county, big win for Biden in 2020. But just go back in time here and see how this has been evolving. We'll go all the way back to 2008. Remember, Obama did win Carolina in 2008. He only carried Wake by 14 points. Look how the Democratic margin has grown in the Trump era. From 14 with Obama, almost double that for Biden in 2020. And that's what we see. We see that in Mecklenburg County. That's where Charlotte is as well. Huge, huge population centers. So what Democrats see is these are big population centers, importantly, that are growing. They're gaining population, and they're becoming more Democratic. So the Democrats say, look, 4 more years of population growth, of becoming a little more Democratic. That's what they hope could certainly erase in their mind the lead that Donald Trump had statewide. The other thing that's happening in Carolina, though, is it's not just about the Blue Islands in the state. It's about many of them very small rural red counties. But look how many of them there are in the state. They add up. So I'll show you a small one here, and this is what we're talking about. Look at Surrey County. It's very small. Trump won it by 52 points in 2020. Now take a look how this one has evolved in the Trump age. Back in 2008, Obama got clobbered here, but the margin was 28 points. A 28-point Republican win in 2008 is now up to 52 for Donald Trump in 2020. And again, this is one small county, but this is happening in so many of these red counties around the state. So they're getting redder. The metro areas are getting bluer. The Democrats hope the numbers work in their favor because of population growth. And I think if there's one X factor here, you do see this patch of blue counties in here. These are small counties. These tend to be rural counties. They have large African-American populations. And you see Democrats did win them. Biden did in 2020, but not quite by the level and not quite with the relative turnout that Barack Obama got when he carried the state in 2008. That might be the key variable when you talk about these two sort of major forces driving the politics in North Carolina. Can Kamala Harris and the Democrats get back more to that Obama level in these counties than, say, Biden did in 2020 or Hillary Clinton did in 2016? That, in a margin this small, could make a big difference. And, Chris, the key with Carolina, of course, of all the battleground states, this is the only one where Democrats are playing offense. If they win it, it's a gain of electoral votes they didn't have before. All of the other battlegrounds, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, Arizona, all already went for Democrats in 2020.
All right, Steve Kornacki, thank you so much for that.
RFK Jr. endorses Trump. As a campaign official, my question for you is, does the Trump campaign see this as a meeting of two people who agree or strange bedfellows who disagree on key issues?
Well, look, RFK probably would have been the Democratic nominee had the system been not rigged against him. And he had an opportunity to have a voice in the process. I think he would have beat Joe Biden, to be very honest with you. But then he went out and decided to run as an independent, realized that there was no path for him to be successful there. And when it specifically when it comes to the issues that are most important to him. He decided, he looked at both of the candidates and said Donald Trump is the best candidate to lead going forward. So on Friday night of last week, we had a massive rally in Glendale, Arizona.
Yep.
RFK was, supported at a response I'd never heard from anybody else that Donald Trump had introduced before. It was amazing. The crowd was so invigorated. And what I think it also does, RFK brings a special subset to the campaign. Those moms and women 25 to 40 years old who are concerned about their children and the vaccines and the food that they're being ingested by the government and the mandates that the government has put on some of those products are coming now to the Trump campaign disproportionately because they support the belief that RFK is going to help fix that problem going forward.
Okay, so you're saying the Trump campaign views him positively on that. We also got a peek into their conversations before the endorsement in a July phone call. I want to play some of that. This is Trump talking to RFK. Take a listen.
I agree with you, man. Something's wrong with that whole system.
Yeah.
And, and it's the doctors you find. Remember I said I want to do small doses. Small doses. When you feed a baby, Bobby, a vaccination that is like 38 different vaccines, then you see the baby all of a sudden starting to change radically. I've seen it too many times. And then you hear that it doesn't have an impact, right?
Given that statement and what you just said, is Donald Trump endorsing RFK Jr.'s vaccine conspiracy theories? This is someone who, as you may know, but I'll remind everyone, RFK Jr. has said that COVID itself was made to target, quote, both Caucasians and black people, that he, quote, won't take sides on 9/11, that the CIA controls the American press. Whatever your press criticisms, I haven't heard you take that position. How much of this should we understand to be the Trump campaign's position? And can you tell us what role RFK Jr. would play in health policy? We're hearing reports he could be involved in the transition team.
Well, RFK Jr. has been someone who's been very steadfast in making sure that when it comes to the decisions that affect your body, you get to choose. And what we saw was government mandates, whether you're a government employee at the local level, the state level, or the federal level, being forced to take an injection in order to save your job. And RFK was against that. By the way, I think a lot of Americans were against that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll let you finish. As you know, Corey, I'll always give you time. You're talking about policy, and you were referring to something that is true. There was a wide national debate about government requirements. I would just mention, I asked you, though, about RFK's actual conspiracy theories. Are you going to tell me that you and Donald Trump think COVID itself was hatched to target people by race, or are you going to reject that part of his agenda?
Ari, I'm not here to answer questions for RFK Jr. He's a big man. He can do that on his own. He's been on television a number of times to answer his own questions. What I am here to tell you is that he has a microphone to an audience who's very concerned that the government mandated vaccines into their children and themselves in order to keep their jobs. And there's real Americans who lost their jobs and their livelihoods because of what the government did to them. And I think when it comes to RFK, specifically those moms who have young children, they're very concerned about what is being injected into their children, whether it's through the food supply or through these vaccines. And RFK has an opportunity to go out and talk about the fact that he was right. The government should not have had to mandate those. We don't know the full impact of what was mandated by the government on the long-term repercussions that it could potentially cause. So we're very much in line with RFK on that position.
All right, I got your answer on that. We have the headlines about you. You're not the whole focus of this interview, but you were a big figure in 2016, and as people know in politics, it happens on a lot of campaigns. You were replaced. You're back here. It says Donald Trump's bringing you back. Some people, I'll give you time to respond, view that as a sign that he thinks something was wrong, that he needs the old 16 team or he needs to shake it up. I also want to mention we have the debate coming. Trump, as you know, has complained publicly and vociferously about many debates, including this one, but it looks like it's on. So the two-part question, Corey, is one, are you back because the campaign needed a change, that there was some problem with the campaign or the team as of last month? And second, what should we expect in this debate? Is it really on? Are they still squabbling over the mics? Why is Donald Trump so worried about the mic rules?
Well, first and foremost, I'm back because the president asked me to be, not because there was any concern with the leadership of this organization. They have done an amazing job. Look at what they were able to accomplish in a competitive Republican primary field, the largest success that any candidate in modern history has ever had. And not just that, before I ever joined this campaign, they drove the Democratic nominee out of the race, something that's never been done before. And for the first time in American history, Donald Trump's going to have the opportunity to be two Democratic candidates for president.
And he did. And Trump did. I'll ask you, Trump did fine in that debate. As you mentioned that history, does he miss Biden? Sometimes it seems like he'd rather be running that race.
Look, I think Kamala's an easier target, to be very honest with you. I think she's going to be easier to beat. She is saddled with the Biden administration's policy. She has flip-flopped on what she believes and what she doesn't believe. And as it relates to the debate, Ari, you know, just remember when the criteria for this debate was set, it was set with the Biden-Harris campaign, not just with Joe Biden. She agreed to all of the terms, specifically as it would have pertained to a vice presidential debate, which she had agreed to. And that meant you stand at the podium. There are no notes required and no notes allowed, and that we have the microphones off. She wanted to change that criteria because she went from being the vice presidential nominee to now the presidential nominee. We all agreed to what it was. Why she wanted to change it was she wanted to be the same height as Donald Trump. She wanted notes. The fact that she continues to hide from the media and the countdown clock is finally on for her of when she's going to sit down for her first national media debate should be appalling to every journalist in America that has taken her 20-plus days to sit down and do an on-camera interview.
Do you feel that you guys are now good on an agreement and on the mics for the debate?
I think everything has been settled, and we look forward to this opportunity.
Yeah. You mentioned Kamala Harris. She has a new ad today hitting you guys on something that Donald Trump used to talk more supportively about and now has distanced himself from, the Heritage Foundation-related Project 2025. This is a new ad. Take a look.
Detailed plans for exactly what our movement will do.
It's called Project 2025, a 922-page blueprint to make Donald Trump the most powerful president ever, overhauling the Department of Justice, giving Trump the unchecked power to seek vengeance.
What is your campaign's position on Project 2025, number one? And number two, if you're going to tell me what Trump has started to say, which is that he's not involved in this thing, then why do so many parts of the Republican platform overlap with 25? And we can put examples on the screen for you, including, as I think you know, abortion, streamlining DOJ, purging nonpartisan public officials, et cetera.
Look, Ari, it's very simple. President Trump has said he has nothing to do with Project 2025. I believe the project has been closed. That was a project of the Heritage Foundation. And there are a lot of groups out there on both the right and the left who come up with policy initiatives and policy ideas, but it doesn't mean that the candidate's going to implement them. Look, as we know, the Kamala Harris campaign is riddled. 60 employees from the Center for American Progress are there. They believe in taxpayer-funded reparations. They believe in transgender surgery without notification for minors. Does that mean that the Kamala Harris campaign supports everything that Cap endorses? Maybe it does, considering she's got 60 people over there and has called their leader one of the finest leaders. So if that's the case, and we're going to hold candidates accountable for what outside organizations on both the right and the left are doing, then we have to hold everyone accountable. And I haven't heard anybody ask Kamala Harris. I know she hasn't sat for an interview, but I don't think the Cap 60 staff or people are going to be asked about tomorrow or the next day when Dana Bash is there, because if she supports their ideals, then she should have to answer for them. And I don't think that's what's going on here.
Well, as you know, Corey, we have no idea what Dana Bash will ask. But on the abortion issue, which is very important, we'll put it up. OK, you now, on behalf of the campaign, are saying that 25 isn't yours. But the current GOP platform has a 14th Amendment effort to try to give what they sometimes call, quote unquote, fetal personhood, or basically would be synonymous with a national abortion ban. And Project 2025 tries to also go after, as you know, abortion rights, even women's right to travel if they want to move in and out of their state, which people are allowed to do. I don't know if you support, as on behalf of the campaign, policies that say a man or a woman can't leave their state for a certain reason. That's a big liberty crackdown. What do you say to people who can read these two things and say, OK, Trump and the platform are basically 25 on abortion?
Look, I know nothing about Project 2025. I've never read their document. You say it's 900 plus pages. I've never read it. I can speak on behalf of the president. I'm certain he's never read a 925-page document that Project 2025 put out. But I will say this. President Trump did what the American people overwhelmingly wanted when it came to the issue of life. He returned it back to the states by appointing pro-life judges at the Supreme Court who overturned Roe v. Wade. And now every state gets to decide what their respective state looks like as it relates to the health of the mother, whether it has exceptions or not, because they're doing it at the ballot box, Ari. And listen, we've seen states like Kansas take the same positions as much more liberal states. But listen, we're an amazing democracy. We're an amazing melting pot.
Well,
and what takes place in one state may not happen in a different.
Kansas went against Trump, went against your campaign. Trump has been hiding on what he's going to do on the Florida state rule, which is up, and he lives there. Are we going to get a position from him on that?
Look, if the president wants to weigh in, I'm sure he'll weigh in at the ballot box like every American gets the opportunity to do. I think we've got 16 states that have this issue at the ballot box. The voters get to decide how they're governed. That's how the system is supposed to work. That's exactly, there's no dictator in this system. So let the people go decide what their state laws look like.
Let me push back, and I'll give you time, Corey. I hear what you're saying, but if Donald Trump puts people on the Supreme Court who overturn 50 years of precedent, and then all these states, including, as you mentioned, more conservative states like Kansas, organize and revolt and push back on something that had been settled law. At what point do you have to admit, on behalf of Donald Trump in this campaign, that this is being rejected by the voters, red, blue, and purple, and that this wasn't a good idea, that this was a crackdown on rights? I mean, if you say to me, this is the laboratories of democracy, but most of the democracy, including red states, says no to you, at what point do you then respect that and reflect that in how you govern if you were in a second term and how you deal with the Supreme Court?
Ari, we know Donald Trump's been very clear. When he ran in 2016, he put out a list of potential conservative judges that he would appoint. The American people knew what his position was going to be on that, and he was very clear about that. Now that they've returned this decision to the states, I live in the state of New Hampshire. We get to vote on it, which may look very different what the state of Massachusetts does. And so, listen, why wouldn't we want these individuals who are living in their respective states to have an opportunity to weigh in of what they think is best for them?
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We are 69 days out from the presidential election. And if there's one thing we know about Donald Trump, no matter where we are in the campaign, no matter what the polls are up and down, is that he is going to be exactly who he is all the time, every day, no matter what. And nothing ever really seems to stick to him politically, at least not enough. He was just indicted all over again by another federal grand jury. He is celebrating an endorsement from a suspected whale decapitator. More on that later if that's confusing you. But the scandal that does have Trump and his people scrambling for cover today has to do with the bizarre photo op the former president did on Monday at Arlington National Cemetery, in which he grinned and gave the camera a thumbs up over the grave of a Marine killed in Afghanistan. The appearance was off-putting enough by itself, but then yesterday, NPR reported that Trump campaign staff at Arlington had actually gotten into an altercation with a worker at the cemetery over their filming among the graves of the fallen. The Trump campaign's top spokesman downplayed the incident in a statement to NBC News with a sort of typically priggish, mean-spirited spin, saying, for whatever reason, an unnamed individual clearly suffering from a mental health episode decided to physically block members of President Trump's team during a very solemn ceremony. But of course, the worker had every reason, right? Arlington National Cemetery suggested as much, telling NBC News a report had been filed on the incident and adding in a statement, federal law prohibits political campaign or election-related activities within Army National Military cemeteries to include photographers, content creators, or any other persons attending for purposes or in direct support of a partisan political candidate's campaign. Arlington National Cemetery reinforced and widely shared this law and its prohibitions with all participants. Trump's co-campaign manager, Chris LaCivita, told NBC News that Trump went to the cemetery to honor Gold Star families, not film a political campaign ad. He'd never do that. And J.D. Vance today tried to play it off as some kind of media creative furor.
You're acting like Donald Trump filmed a TV commercial at a gravesite. He was there providing emotional support to a lot of brave Americans who lost loved ones they never should have lost, and there happened to be a camera there.
Oh, there happened to be a camera there? How stupid do you think we are? He was just called to provide emotional support, a thing he does all the time away from the cameras. And oh, look at that, a camera. This was the video Trump posted, of course, to his social media that day.
We lost 13 great people. What a horrible day it was. We didn't lose one person in 18 months. And then they took over that disaster, the leaving of Afghanistan.
That's a campaign ad filmed in Arlington, obviously. Also, we didn't lose one person in 18 months. Dozens of U.S. service members died in action under Donald Trump. That's been erased. No ceremony for them, no ad, certainly. So that's Trump going to military cemetery to film a video reminding viewers of the U.S. deaths during the withdrawal from Afghanistan, blaming his successor for them, of course, without mentioning that Trump tied Joe Biden's hands by agreeing to a withdrawal timeline set by the Taliban. But not a political ad, right? The cameraman happened to be there, as J.D. Vance said. Thing is, Trump wasn't even the only politician capitalizing off that Arlington visit. He was accompanied by Republican Utah Governor Spencer Cox, a guy you say you never vote for Trump until, of course, he endorsed him, who then used photos of the event to, get this, solicit donations in a campaign email. A violation of federal law as well, and something the governor now says was a mistake, a thing he'll say about voting for Trump in a few months, probably. Trump's team, however, is, of course, because they're Trump and his team, not admitting any mistakes. Instead, they've got J.D. Vance, the member of the Republican ticket with military experience, responding on the campaign trail.
Could you tell us more about the altercation that happened at the Arlington Cemetery?
Now, it is amazing to me that you have apparently somebody at Arlington Cemetery, some staff member, had a little disagreement with somebody, and the media has turned this into a national news story. The families of these poor people who had their loved ones die 3 years ago at Abbey Road, Abbey Gate, those 13 Americans, a lot of them were there with the president. They invited him to be there and to support them. That's not an insult to the memories of their loved ones. They wanted Donald Trump there, and thank God that we have a president who stands with our veterans instead of one who runs away from them.
Okay, this is important, honestly, on this. It is true, Trump was invited. He was invited by some of those family members who Trump has been talking to, right? But this is a really important point. He was not invited by all the families of all the 400,000 veterans and dependents that are buried at Arlington, who did not and cannot consent to be used as props and a backdrop by a few other bereaved families for this individual. That's why the prohibition exists. It's a complete prohibition. It doesn't matter if he was invited. And beyond Vance disparaging someone who works at Arlington National Cemetery for enforcing the rules, is Donald Trump really a president who stands with our veterans instead of one who runs away from them? Really? Donald, I don't like losers. I like people that weren't captured. Trump, the Donald Trump who spent so much of his first presidential campaign attacking the parents. Do you remember this one? Of an American Army officer who died in Iraq in 2004? The Donald Trump who, as president, fumbled the name of a fallen soldier in a condolence call to his widow, then bickered with her and then knocked her in interviews? The Donald Trump who, according to his chief of staff, his own chief of staff, a retired four-star Marine general, refused to pay his respects at a veterans cemetery in Europe, saying, "Why should I go to that cemetery? It's filled with losers." And who, on that same trip, called the more than 1,800 Marines who died at Belleau Wood suckers for getting killed? Or was it the Donald Trump who reportedly hated being filmed or photographed with wounded veterans? At Army General Mark Milley's welcoming ceremony as chairman of the Joint Chiefs in 2019, General chosen a combat wounded soldier, Luis Avila, to sing God Bless America at the ceremony. You can see Avila there in the wheelchair. Milley said afterward the president told him, "Why do you bring people like that here? No one wants to see that, the wounded." And if you think, well, all that's in the past, it was just less than 2 weeks ago when Donald Trump used war-wearied American service members as a kind of punchline about how rough they all look in order to talk up one of his biggest political donors.
I have to say, Miriam, I watched Sheldon sitting so proud in the White House when we gave Miriam the Presidential Medal of Freedom. That's the highest award you can get as a civilian. It's the equivalent of the Congressional Medal of Honor, but civilian version. It's actually much better because everyone gets the Congressional Medal of Honor. That's soldiers. They're either in very bad shape because they've been hit so many times by bullets or they're dead. She gets it, and she's a healthy, beautiful woman. It's right.
See, they don't have any of those ugly scars or wounds or bullet marks. She's beautiful, right? Isn't that awesome? Isn't that the highest that one could hope for? You could be forgiven for looking at all this and thinking that Trump only has respect for the most revered American institutions, the military, the justice system, free elections, when they're working for him.
Taylor inducted me into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and she sang my song, Will You Love Me Tomorrow? So I have to go. Players gonna play, 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 play. Haters gonna hate, 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 hate. Baby, I'm just gonna shake, 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 shake. I shake it off, I shake it off.
Delightful. And that was music legend and friend of Morning Joe, Carole King, covering some Taylor Swift, as you just heard, during a Swifties for Kamala fundraising call last night. Now, the event was not organized by the Harris campaign or Swift's team, but it comes after other groups held similar calls, including White Dudes for Harris, Deadheads for Harris, and Cat Ladies for Kamala. Proud Swiftie and Democratic Congressman Chris Deluzio of Pennsylvania was also on that call last night. He joins us now. Congressman, I will ask you not to sing, but we are grateful that you are here. Tell us just about this organizing effort and how it represents this sort of growing excitement on the grassroots level for the Democrats' new nominee.
Jonathan, good to see you. Thanks for not asking me to sing. I think you'd lose some viewers fast. Look, the call was fun, but also serious. I mean, you had more than 30,000 folks come on, committed to doing some hard organizing work. There was a lot of fun. There was a lot of joy. And I think it tells you something about our politics. You got to meet folks where they are. You got to give them something to believe in and some reason to have some joy and some happiness in doing the hard work of politics. I saw that last night in the call. People had a great time, and they really stepped up to do some things to help people and help Democrats win up and down the ticket. It was a fun and inspiring event.
Congressman, good morning. It's Alexi McCammond. It sounds like it was a fun call. I'm wondering if you could share for us how you think the Harris campaign could turn this into something longer lasting than just a social media moment with the Swifties, especially after we saw the Trump campaign put out that insane AI fake endorsement from Taylor Swift.
Well, it helps when you're a candidate in a party that believes in standing up for people's freedom, that believes that women should get to make their own choices about their pregnancies and their health and their families. And then when you're fighting to bring down costs by taking on corporate price gougers, there's teeth behind the things that I think are firing people up. And look, you got to embrace when there's enthusiasm, and there is right now. I heard it in the intro to this interview about not just Swifties for Kamala, but white dudes and deadheads and whoever else. Where there's organizing energy, you got to embrace it and give people the resources to do it and to drive that enthusiasm to turn into action. Making calls, texts, door knocking, all the things that go into the hard work of winning elections. And I think this campaign and mine and others are doing exactly that.
Congressman, you appeared with the Vice President and Tim Walz at an event earlier this month. She's going to be back in Pennsylvania on Labor Day. I'm sure she'll be there again and again and again. When you speak to the Harris campaign, what's your advice to them about which parts of the state to target and how to reach people who aren't just in urban areas who may be leaning Democratic already?
Well, I have the great privilege of representing Western Pennsylvania. I've been clear. I think they got to spend time in Western Pennsylvania. You saw them there about a week or so ago. And we were in the West Hills of Allegheny County and Beaver County. These are places where Democrats, Republicans compete for votes. And you saw Governor Walz and Vice President Harris join me, Senator Casey, and others. It shows they understand they got to work to earn those votes. And I'm going to keep doing that, of course, in my district. But it's nice to see Top a Ticket listen and really spend the time to earn votes in places like Western Pennsylvania, where, frankly, we're fighting hard to take on corporate price gouging and bring back more of our manufacturing and stand up for our freedom. Those are messages that can win in Western PA, and it's nice to see our Top a Ticket understand that.
And we saw the Top Ticket understand that when you're in Western PA, you need to hit both Sheetz and Permane Brothers, and they did both. Democratic Congressman Chris Deluzio of Pennsylvania, thank you for joining us this morning. Turning now to business, while August has been a pretty volatile month for the markets, viewers of Morning Joe were cautioned early on not to panic.
You have to speak to the needs of everyone. And the Vice President Harris speaks to the needs of people in Savannah and our partners in coastal Georgia. The road to the White House goes through Georgia, and the lane to that road goes through Savannah, goes through coastal Georgia. We know that she's been engaged heavily in rural hospitals, which is important to our neighbors in and around us. Certainly the farmers, helping them, $3.1 billion to invest in farmers across rural Georgia. She speaks to the issues that are important to us, and we're just excited that she's coming.
Hi again, everyone. I'm Jen Psaki in for Nicole Wallace. It's 5 o'clock in New York. And in southern Georgia, where both members of the Democratic presidential ticket are out on the campaign trail together for the first time since officially becoming the party's nominees last week. You can see there some footage from the bus tour and the new bus there. They made a statement today with the location of their two-bus tour. In back of them, the Peach State is back in play. Now, as NBC News reports, Joe Biden won Georgia by fewer than 12,000 votes over Trump in 2020. That's a close race. But he did become the first Democrat to carry the longtime GOP stronghold in nearly 3 decades. Now it's up to Harris to prove whether that was a fluke or whether Democrats can keep it in the blue column at the highest level. That means campaigning in Atlanta and running up the totals. It also means campaigning in areas that haven't always gotten attention from Democrats running for president, cutting into Republican margins in areas that have historically gone red. Harris is taking a page from the Senator Raphael Warnock playbook, who won Georgia in the 2020 election and again in 2022. The senator telling reporters just last week at the DNC, quote, "We built an architecture to win. I think we can put Georgia in the Harris-Walz column. I'm not going to pretend that that will be an easy thing to do. But can we do it? I absolutely believe that we can." And reporting in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution suggests that a number of local elected officials also believe that this is the way to win. Democratic State Senator Derek Mallow of Savannah called the bus tour monumental. Former State Representative Calvin Smear of Columbus called it a big deal. And Melissa Klink, a veteran liberal activist in the exurbs, declared herself overjoyed. Winning Georgia means understanding Georgia is much larger than just Atlanta, she said. It includes our rural areas as well as our larger cities outside the perimeter who are anxious for attention. Now, later this hour, Harris and Walz will make another campaign stop, and tomorrow they will continue their tour, tape their first sit-down interview, and Harris will hold a solo rally in Savannah. For his part, the Trump team is not discounting Georgia either. Trump wanted to win there so badly last time. Remember, he got indicted over his efforts to overturn the results of the state. And it still gets under his skin whenever he's in Georgia, it seems. There's only 70 days to go. We will soon see if the road to the White House in 2024 for the Harris-Walz team runs through Georgia. But this is all a big start for that. And that is where we start this hour with White House correspondent Mike Memoli out in Savannah, Georgia, following the Harris-Walz bus campaign and the bus. With me at the table here is writer and editor for Protect Democracy, Amanda Carpenter, as well as MSNBC Justice and Legal Affairs analyst and veteran of many a Southern campaign, Anthony Coley. Okay, Mike, I want to start with you. I know we have limited time because we got to get back following that bus, whatever that means. Tell us about what's going on in Savannah at the moment, what they've done on the ground, what the reaction's been.
Well, Jen, we saw as soon as Vice President Harris stepped off Air Force Two, we see a bit of the coalition work that's underway here in southern Georgia. She and Governor Walz posed for a photo with students from Savannah State University, which is one of many historically black colleges and universities here in the state of Georgia. Now they're on their way into more rural parts of these counties around Savannah. And it really speaks to the strategy of a campaign that feels like it has some very real momentum. The kids would call this a flex. They have the resources and they have the ability with a more competitive race than maybe was the case with President Biden at the top of the ticket to play in the expanded battleground map. They're trying to not just run up the score in places like Atlanta, as a typical Democratic campaign would do, but they want to make inroads into places where Donald Trump has the advantage. And call it the Raphael Warnock playbook. You also know we can relive our past lives from 2012. This is a bit of the Obama playbook as well. When I was on the road quite a bit with then Vice President Joe Biden, especially in a state like Ohio, they would send him to exactly these kinds of places. They were Romney, maybe 55, 60% counties where they wanted to maybe shave a percentage point, 2, 3, even 4 off his margins in those counties, and then have President Obama hit places like Columbus, like Cleveland, like Cincinnati to drive turnout among the base. All of that adds up to maybe a narrow victory, but a victory. And Ohio was the state that put President Obama over the line to win re-election. So that's what we're seeing here, where President Biden and his campaign had sort of been really shrinking the map to focus on defense, playing in those blue wall states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. We see them making an intentional statement with this trip, coming out of the convention, a very successful convention in their view, to put the Trump campaign on notice that they're not just winning the states that they need to win the election, but to maybe expand that to have a big victory on November 5th.
It's definitely an interesting. It was reminding me of the Obama-Biden strategy, too, of showing up. I've been on many a bus tour in many parts of the country where people are surprised they're there. But that's part of it, and that's part of how many people win in these more red or purple states. I want to ask you, since I have you here, you broke a huge story yesterday. You had new reporting about kind of this plan for a super PAC or a PAC that is going to run a big program that is going to be important after the election to counter basically Republican legal challenges and the battles that Democrats expect are going to come. Tell us a little bit more about your reporting. When is it going to start? What is their overall strategy? What are they hoping to really accomplish with it?
Yeah, Jen, this is going to be before, during, and after the election. They call it the Democracy Defenders PAC. And this really speaks to the need. Yes, every campaign, the National Committee, they all have what they call voter protection operations within their campaigns. But this is going to be an entity that is singularly focused on just that issue, both supporting legal efforts on the part of campaigns and parties up and down the ballot to make sure that they're expanding voting access, to make sure they're confronting Republican efforts to maybe restrict access, to challenge the vote, but also to go on the messaging front. When they see Donald Trump and his Republican allies trying to sow disinformation, sow doubt about this election, they want to be able to confront that and counteract that. So when you talk to Democrats about what keeps them up at night, it's this fact. It's that when Donald Trump did go to court after the 2012 election, it was very much last-minute, disorganized, a bit chaotic, and unsuccessful in the end. But they are worried that the Trump team and his allies are much more prepared this go around, not just to try to challenge the results after the election, but to make efforts to challenge voting rules, to challenge early votes that are being cast already. So this is being led by Jim Messina, who, of course, led the Obama campaign in 2012. We're also seeing Norm Eisen, who was part of the impeachment team, a well-known Democratic lawyer, a former ally of Stacey Abrams is involved as the chief legal advisor, and our friend T.J. Ducklo also as the chief strategist. So this is going to be a new effort that is going to work hand in hand with the campaigns, with the state parties. They think it's an important mission, and they have $10 million to start this effort, and will raise more over the course of the next few weeks and months.
Mike Memoli, we're going to let you go back to chasing the bus, being on the bus, hopefully, doing all the bus things that you do. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us this afternoon. And I'm going to bring in the panel here that I'd already introduced. Let me start with you, Anthony, because you and I met when you were, I think, a regional desk for Southern States on the Kerry campaign. Look at that memory.
We have more white hair. I do right now.
That's right. But back then, Democrats were not winning Southern States.
Right.
That was a hard assignment you had back then. Things have shifted a bit. What would you say to people who are kind of new to following this and thinking, okay, is Georgia an easy state? Is North Carolina an easy state?
Right.
What is different about this region of the country in terms of competing there as a Democrat?
So here's what was so interesting to me, Jen, about this last report. We heard Mike use the term. He said it was a flex.
Yeah.
Right, for Kamala Harris.
That.
I love that term, and he's absolutely right. Here's some facts. This is the first time in more than 30 years that a Democratic nominee has been to Savannah and surrounding areas. And the reason...
It's so surprising because it's Warnock's hometown.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But that, gives credence to the fact that Democrats have not always played in rural areas, in these one-stoplight towns where faith and family and football, some people would put football in front of family, depending on the SEC playoff game, but where those things reign supreme. The reason that it is... competitive right now is because women, in particular black women like LaToya Brown, like Stacey Abrams, invested the time. They built out the infrastructure. And so that's how we got Warnock and Ossoff. The other thing that's important here is demographic changes. Amy Walters said today, and I think she's right, that the electorate could be upwards of 29% of African-American voters. Statewide, 60% are expected of the voter are expected to come from Metro Atlanta, which has historically been Democratic. The other thing I will say here, finally, is that we were talking about this a little earlier, is the transformational impact of good public policy. I worked for Ted Kennedy, who he would say all the time, smart policy makes for smart politics. And this infrastructure law, we heard the mayor talk about it, $3.1 billion going to rural farmers throughout Georgia, $10 billion overall, including roads, bridges. But I read one story today, Jen, because I'm a regional press guy. I went back, I want to hear what
AJC,
local.
still reading the AJC.
Savannah Morning News.
Okay, good.
Which told us
wasn't the Savannah Morning News, Anthony?
So, historic African-American community, right? They get $30 million to prevent storm drain flooding. That may not sound like a big thing, but when you have generational wealth invested into your home and you're just trying to save your home where you can raise your family, stuff like that matters, and people are going to vote in their best interest. And that's what I think Georgia's in play.
Joining me now, Savannah Mayor Van Johnson. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Mayor. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. A pleasure.
So what do you think of this move to go outside of, as I said before, these safer blue districts in Georgia, bluer districts?
Well, let's be really clear. Savannah is reliably blue. Chatham County is reliably blue. But I think it's really more speaks to the vice president's attitude that at the end of the day, we're one big tent. After the election, you have to speak to the needs of everyone. And the Vice President Harris speaks to the needs of people in Savannah and our partners in coastal Georgia. The road to the White House goes through Georgia, and the lane to that road goes through Savannah, goes through coastal Georgia. We know that she's been engaged heavily in rural hospitals, which is important to our neighbors in and around us. Certainly the farmers, helping them, $3.1 billion to invest in farmers across rural Georgia. She speaks to the issues that are important to us, and we're just excited that she's coming.
What are the issues, the top issues that you think she should be talking about?
Well, it is always the economy. It is the economy. The reality is, although we have indicators that say that things are better, many Americans just don't feel like it. Stuff is still too high. It costs too much for places to live and for health care. And she speaks directly to those issues. How do we deal with resiliency in a coastal city like Savannah that deals every year with even more and more significant rain and wind events? How do we deal with individuals being able to grow up and be able to go to college and live their best lives and live their best dreams? She understands us. She gets us. And so we're excited to have her here because she speaks to the needs of Savannah and coastal Georgia.
Abortion, is that going to be a big issue for voters who are not Democrats in Georgia, but who are independents in Georgia or moderate Republicans in Georgia?
It is a huge issue. At the end of the day, healthcare decisions should be made by a woman and their doctor, not a woman, her doctor, and the government. The reality is we should not be a part of that. I know Georgians, I know Savannahans were outraged with the overturning of Roe versus Wade. She was just here. Vice President Harris was just here in February on her reproductive freedoms tour. So this is actually the second time she's been here in 6 months. Love is an action word. It's one thing to say you love you. It's something different to show up twice, and she's done that.
I love that. I'm going to say that to my husband. Love is an action word. You better show up with flowers one of these days.
Tell him to bring you to Savannah. Tell him to bring you to Savannah. That's what.
That would be great. I will tell him that. Let me read a quote from you. You might enjoy this quote. This is from the chairman of the Gwinnett County Republican Party. He said replacing Biden with Harris has been good for the Democrats. Quote, I was very, very comfortable that it would be not an easy win, but it would be a 4 or 5 point win. I think it's going to be a little tighter now because I think she's energized a few of the Democrats that were not energized before, and they seem to be a little bit more active. So is this going to come down to energized Democrats, or does she need to find more than that?
It comes down to energized Democrats, but it also comes down to speaking to Republicans who are tired of the juvenile behavior of the other candidate, of the mean-spiritedness, of the threats to our democracy, the thoughts that we're not patriotic because we're Democrat, and then also independent people who, might vote another way, but on this day and this race, that they will go in there and they'll vote for the person that best represents their interests, who won't embarrass them, and who certainly is not a felon.
Are you concerned about the new rules put in place by the Georgia Election Board?
Of course I am. It's like you play the whole season and then before the World Series, you change the rules. And again, this is something we've dealt with here in Georgia, despite the fact that it's been proven conclusively time and time again that there were no widespread voter fraud here, yet the rules keep changing. We have to fight, and when we fight, we win. And we're going to fight, and we're going to fight by showing up at the ballot box.
It's a reasonable inquiry to put things into question. Do you know what that means? Is there a limit to that? Do you know what a reasonable inquiry would not be regarding ballots?
A reasonable inquiry would be once you ask the question and the question has been answered and there's supporting documentation, and then you refuse. But beyond that, that's reasonable. When you keep questioning the result, when you keep questioning the inquiry, at some point it just goes from being reasonable to being absurd. And so we are living in the time of absurdity. We have 4 years into the Biden-Harris administration, and there are people still talking about what happened in 2020, which in my mind is absolutely absurd. The fact is that Joe Biden is our president. Kamala Harris is our vice president. And I was an elector in Georgia, one of the 16 that got to cast that historic vote. And the fact is that, we're moving on. We have moved on from that, and we need to move on.
Mayor Van Johnson of Savannah, Georgia, thank you very much for joining us.